Hello, and welcome to this webinar regarding Hurricane Harvey and the role of the employer in relief and recovery. We appreciate very much your interest and your participation in this webinar, and our goal here is hopefully to share some information with you that other organizations, other business leaders have found helpful as they have responded to Hurricane Harvey both in Texas and throughout the Gulf region. My name is Jeff Gorter. I've been the clinical director here at R3 Continuum for the past 13 years and have unfortunately responded to many large-scale events of this nature. But what we have found over the course of time here at R3 is that this truly is more than a job. As this quote from Health and Human Secretary Sylvia Burwell highlights, while natural disasters capture the headlines and the national attention for a short time, the work of recovery and rebuilding is long-term. This clearly is a marathon, not a sprint. And also Petra Nomkova also comments that we cannot stop natural disasters, but we can arm ourselves with knowledge. Now, many of you may be asking, who is Petra Nomkova? Petra Nomkova is actually a supermodel, which is somewhat strange to think that, okay, why would a supermodel have a commentary on natural disasters? But Petra had the unfortunate experience of being in Thailand during the 2004 earthquake and tsunami that killed over 200,000 people. And so as a survivor herself, she has become a philanthropist and an outspoken proponent of preparation for natural disasters. And so again, our goal here with this webinar is hopefully to provide a little bit of knowledge that may arm you and prepare you as we respond to the ravages of Hurricane Harvey. Some things to remember, just to set the table, if you will. Hurricane Harvey was a devastating storm. It delivered the most rainfall ever recorded by any U.S. storm to date. So how much was that? Estimates place that rain total from Harvey throughout the region to be at 33 trillion gallons. To put it in perspective, Hurricane Katrina at its peak delivered about 6.5 trillion gallons. And it's also true that Harvey, during its most intense 4-day period over Houston, the amount of liquid, the amount of water that was poured specifically into that county, into the county that Houston resides, was equivalent to the output of Niagara Falls for a 24-hour period for 15 straight days. It's an incredibly sobering and powerful image to imagine how much water was delivered to that region and to that city. But those numbers pale by comparison to the human toll, which is truly the matter that we should be most focused on. At this point, authorities are confirming around 60 fatalities. That number may rise as there are those who are wounded or as they discover others. But early estimates place it at around 60 fatalities directly connected to the hurricane and the flooding that followed. We also know that around 42,000 people were displaced and evacuated to emergency shelters. Part of that, of course, is because over 100,000 homes were damaged throughout the region, with 40,000 of those being specific to Houston alone. And this final number, over 1 million cars, 1 million automobiles were destroyed or damaged and are currently inoperable. Again, that might seem like, well, that's a material thing, it's a car, but the reality is, when you are seeking to rebuild, when you're seeking to get emergency aid, when you're seeking to return to work and return to life, the devastation and the inaccessibility of transportation becomes a huge, huge issue. And when we think that over a third of the residents in Houston lost their automobiles, it's a pretty staggering number, again, when you're trying to take steps to return to life and to normal for you and your family. Some other unique aspects, some things that we've been hearing some some reports, if you will, from the field as we interact with our team of responders who are currently out there, even as we speak, providing support and assistance to employers as their employees are coming back to work. And some of the themes we're hearing is that there's a growing sense of anger among many of the residents in Houston and throughout the region at how quickly the rest of the nation has moved on. And I know that in our rapidly changing 24-hour news cycle, it stands to reason that attention is going to move on, particularly as now Hurricane Irma has also entered the picture and is beginning to dominate the perspective. But for the folks in Houston and throughout the region, they haven't moved on. Things have been going forward at a crawl, and so there is just a sense of frustration, a sense of anger that, wow, how quickly has the rest of the nation turned its attention to other matters. It's also true, another theme that we've heard is that the current political climate, particularly around the immigration debate, has led many residents to have a fear, a reluctance to access or apply for aid out of fear that might lead to deportation or other issues that could further complicate. And again, what a challenge and a dilemma for those individuals who are desperately in need of aid, but fearful of what that might, what the unintended consequences might be. It's also true that there are significant housing shortages. Again, certainly those who are homeowners have sustained significant damage, but what is often forgotten is that those who are renters, those who are renting either homes or in rental buildings, in apartment buildings, those renters effectively have to be evicted. In a house, you could perhaps begin to create safe places. You could restore rooms and use that as an operating base and house yourself or your family there as you slowly go through the process of reclaiming and repairing your home. But if you're a renter, you cannot stay in that same facility while it's being repaired, and so in effect, they are being evicted until such time as they're able to return, and so that creates a tremendous housing shortage. As I mentioned, with the million cars being destroyed, Houston is at its best a car town. It does have public transit, but it's limited, and certainly it's a town that is known for for its reliance on the automobile as the primary method of transportation throughout the city. And so again, as I said earlier, being able to get needed supplies, whether it's medical or home repair, are now severely limited, and public transit as well is impacted in this powerful way. So where do we go from here? I think so many efforts, so many resources are being mobilized, and that's tremendous. It's a tremendous reflection on the city of Houston, on the state of Texas, on the United States as a whole, as so many people are coming together and providing resources and support and encouragement in a variety of ways. But what I want to focus on are some specific things that the business community can do. I believe the business community has a unique role to play, and that understanding and syncing your efforts with what is being done, with what best practices following a large-scale event entail, will allow you to perhaps maximize the positive impact of what you as a business owner or leader can do, how we can utilize those resources to its best impact in supporting a business recovery, which in turn supports your employees' recovery. It's also true that employees are going to present with different needs at different times, and so all of our efforts have to be flexible and adaptable with the understanding that things may change, the dynamics may evolve, and that over time different things are going to be required. So I think it's helpful for us to step back and take a look at what does the evidence say. This chart here is a result of um, an international consensus study on the leading experts around the globe in what should be our focal point following a mass trauma or a mass disaster. What are the things that we should focus on first? What's most important in helping individuals recover psychologically, which of course allows them to then move forward physically. And so these 5 areas, safety, connectedness, calming, self-efficacy, and hope, are the primary building blocks, the primary areas that need to be focused on in order to give people the needed boost they require in order to determine what the next right step is. And so we're going to take a look at each of these specifically so that we can determine how best to focus the efforts of your business to support your employees. So first and foremost, safety. Absolutely the first priority, both physically and emotionally. I highlight that, both physically and emotionally, because oftentimes people think, well, the flooding has receded, right? So we must be physically safe, and so we can move on. But the fact is that there remain significant hazards, both physically, and that continues to maintain an element of fear, which creates that sense of emotional unsafety. And so it's important for us to just be aware of and understand what some of those safety hazards are. Among them, and primarily, is contaminated water. Many areas continue to struggle with having potable water that is safe to drink, and that orders by local safety and health officials continue to recommend that water should be boiled before consumed, and that's happening in many areas throughout the region. But one of the things to be aware of as well is the role of standing water, because as the water torrents flowed through the city and through the area, yes, many of us are aware that, okay, you know, it contains a high level of sewage as the sewers were flushed out. But because that region is a primary center of petroleum refining as well as chemical manufacturing, there is a high level of barium, arsenic, even mercury in much of that standing water. And so it's important to recognize, even if I walk through a puddle and think there's no damage or harm to myself, I should wash off as soon as possible if I encounter this kind of standing water, for fear of what dangers may reside in that water. It's also true in any large-scale event that tetanus is a risk, as individuals are either tearing out drywall, removing destroyed items. It's possible and a potential to receive a cut or a scratch in any open wound that is exposed to that kind of contaminated water, or to to things that are beginning to rust or decay. Increases the risk of tetanus. And so it's important that all residents, take extra precaution as they are doing these activities, but also to make sure that their tetanus shots are up to date in order to protect at this time. It's also true, as we related with the standing water, that we're not through the season yet where mosquitoes are no longer a concern. And so that standing water is going to breed and release eventually mosquitoes that may increase the concern around Zika, dengue fever, and West Nile fever. And so it may be important as well to wear long sleeve clothing if possible, and to have bug repellent on hand, especially for children who often don't necessarily attend to the risk that mosquitoes may pose. And then finally, of course, mold. In any water-based, any flood-based disaster, the presence and the growth of mold is tremendous, sometimes in obvious places and sometimes in areas that are less visible, and corners and behind drywall and things of that nature, and carpets and furniture and upholstery. The growth of mold, of course, presents significant respiratory challenges as well as the potential for other health crises. And so again, being aware of and cognizant of the role and the danger posed by mold. As safety is secured, then the next issue that often is powerful for people is connectedness, the sense that I am not alone, the sense that I am part of a community, that I am part of this. And the disruption to communities that happen following an event of this size does carry a powerful emotional impact. That's a lesson we learned from Katrina, when so many people were evacuated throughout areas throughout the country. And in many ways, they needed to be, and those were the most immediate ways to provide safe and easily accessible housing. But as so many folks who evacuated from Katrina later reported, leaving their community, being removed, especially over a long distance and long periods of time, led to a disruption in their sense of place, the sense that I belong in a certain area and that I am part of a community. And so as best as we can to enhance that sense of connectedness can minimize the impact that that disruption has. And because we have so many more ways electronically to stay connected, being able to confirm the safety of family members, of friends, of neighbors, coworkers, even pets and other livestock, being able to remain in contact and to reach out and confirm the safety and the whereabouts of others can help maintain that sense of community, that sense of place, even if I'm not able to live in that place right now. But anything I can do to enhance that sense of connectedness is powerful and well worth the doing. There's a powerful role that faith groups, community groups, even athletic teams can provide connective relief. An email from my bowling team or my softball league, my football team, just things to say, hey, we're all okay. How's everybody doing? A way to, again, stay connected provides a powerful emotional support at this time. And again, the workplace offers a source of connectedness that is often overlooked. It's kind of a euphemism, sort of a trite phrase. Many people say, oh, this is my work family. But the reality is, many of us spend 40 plus hours a week with our coworkers. And so the emotional connectedness, the sense of support, the concern that we have for each other, and the ability to connect and reinforce with each other, our work family does play a role. And again, the employer plays a significant part in that. As soon as we can reconnect those bonds and enhance group cohesion, allows the natural strength and resilience that resides in work families to begin to take effect. Next, we look at calming, or the simply being able to calm my body, to calm my mind, to be able to catch my breath, and to be able to let the clenched muscles tighten, because mass disasters often create this frequent vacillation, this bouncing back and forth between adrenaline-fueled energy and outright physical exhaustion, and that people often will report that, I can't stop. I just keep going. My mind is racing. I continue to do this activity beyond what I thought is possible. And then all of a sudden the body says, okay, that's enough. And there's a physical exhaustion that sets in, and I can't hardly get off the couch, and we'll bounce back and forth between that. So I think what's most helpful over the long term is for people to understand that this is about managing stress, not eliminating stress. It's about making a plan that has a realistic expectation over an extended period of time. Again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I don't want to set myself up for disappointment by how can I make it all go away, but instead, I want to engage in small acts of intentional self-care. whether it's taking 15 minutes away, whether it's stopping and just allowing yourself to listen to a favorite song, to go for a walk, to watch a sunset, to reach out and to call a friend or a family member. Any of these activities are small, easily engaged acts of intentional self-care. I often encourage people to develop a personalized menu of options. What are your top 10 ways of self-care? What are the top 10 easiest ways to, if all you have is 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half hour, what are the things that you can do to care for yourself? And develop this menu, these options, this top 10 list. Have it easily accessible. Have it on your phone, your computer, have it on a piece of paper in your wallet. But develop that list, because when you are stressed, when you hit that period of exhaustion, when you feel like you can't take anymore, that is not the time when you're going to be extremely creative in self-care approaches. That's not when you're going to be able to say, oh, let me think about those many ways I could care for myself. Exhaustion is going to limit your ability to access that. And so being able to reference, all you have to remember is, let me check my menu. Let me look at my self-care list. Let me take a look at my options, and know that these are the things you have developed beforehand in order to help you cope in that moment when exhaustion or stress begins to mount. And again, to recognize, I cannot stress enough how employee assistance programs, many employers offer their employees as a benefit access to their EAP, their Employee Assistance Program. And EAPs can serve as your externalized frontal lobe. They can be that part of you that can help you form strategy, help you get support, help you walk through a plan, developing a plan that says, what's the next right thing to do? What's the next right thing after that? EAPs are able to offer that 24/7 support. And so if you as an employer have that benefit for your employees, promote that. Let people know that that is an option for them as a way to help both the employees, but the business leaders, the managers, those who are charged with coming up with the strategy and the plan. Your EAP can be an invaluable source of strategy and support for you as a business leader as you're making a plan for your employees and for yourself. Next, we move on to competence, or what is sometimes called self-efficacy, that idea of what are the decisions, what can I do, what do I believe I'm capable of doing. And again, the enormity of these events can easily overwhelm. It clouds the perspective, it drains the energy, and leads people to begin to doubt, can I do anything in the face of this? Look at how big this is. How am I ever going to make any difference at all? And while those thoughts of discouragement, of despair even, are understandable and commonly reported, it's helpful for us to take a step back, break the recovery efforts into smaller, more achievable tasks in order to build a sense of momentum. What is something small I can do? What can I do right now? Again, I'm not trying to make it all go away in one fell swoop. That's impossible. But if I break my tasks down into smaller, more manageable activities, I'll find that I begin to have a sense of momentum, that I can check things off the list and have a sense of progress, that I am moving forward, however slowly, however small steps I'm taking, but I am continuing to move forward. And that sense of competence, of self-efficacy, of self-belief is a key element in being able to move forward. We only move forward to the degree that we believe we can move forward. And so breaking things into small tasks is a great way to empower your team, to empower your leaders to move forward. It's also true that as business leaders, you're aware of who are the official leaders, those with officially sanctioned roles of leadership, but you also are aware of those who are the unofficial leaders, those who are often the ones that rise to the occasion in events like this, who encourage people, who are the ones who maintain the morale and the sense of esprit de corps that a group has. And they may not be official leaders, but you know who they are. And so seek out both the official and unofficial folks for their input. What do you think would be the next right thing? How can we reach out to our team? How can we care for each other at this time? And solicit their input, get their ideas, because these organic solutions are often the most effective, and they have the added benefit of immediate buy-in, because you're having both official and unofficial leaders empowered to make suggestions like this, hearing those ideas and empowering them to put them into effect, also has a tremendous benefit to the work group as a whole. So ultimately, we're looking to instill that idea, that concept that says, while I couldn't do anything to stop the hurricane, where it goes from here is up to me. And reinstilling that sense of belief that I can make effective choices for myself, for my work team, for my family. Being able to believe in oneself is a key element in moving forward. And then finally, hope. Hope. That sense that we will eventually get through this. There will be another day. This too is something that we can rise to the occasion, and that we are able to meet this. We have seen in news reports thousands of expressions of hope. Those, again, that are widely witnessed and that we've seen, again, on the news or social media, and then other expressions of hope that are silently offered and go unnoticed. But truly, all those in Houston and all those in Texas, Galveston, and Louisiana, and other areas that have been hit have risen to the occasion and have reached out as communities, as individuals, as work groups to express their hope and encouragement to each other. One of the themes that has begun to emerge is the concept of unity through diversity. Houston is one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the United States. And so that ethnicity, that diversity creates a foundation of resilience that is not to be underestimated. It means that people are approaching this from a variety of perspectives, with a variety of experiences in their own histories, and they are pulling together as one community, but in a variety of ways that makes them stronger together than they would be apart. It's one thing that is widely known and that Texans take great pride on, that this is an event where we have seen again Texans helping Texans. People pulling together and helping their own community. They're not looking for rescue from outside sources as if they're not able to meet this challenge themselves. They are taking steps forward of their own initiative and through their own encouragement. And so that has just led to a theme that I've heard as well, is that Texans are victors, not victims, and that they are moving forward together, and that they are confident that they can get through this event and that they can get back to a sense of not normal as if it didn't happen, but a new normal that begins to emerge through their efforts. So I want to again highlight the role of work and recovery. What are some specific things that the employer and that business leaders can do to be able to leverage the power of the workplace to be able to help people recover? One way they can do that is to not underestimate the power of the mundane, the usual, the regular, because returning to work is returning to life. So many employees crave the mundane. They crave the structure, the predictability, the familiarity that their normal work activities lend. And even when everything else is still in a state of chaos, even when the way forward is in many ways unclear for some folks, but being able to return to normal work where I feel competent, where I feel capable, what I am trained to do, the power of the mundane, of the normal, of the average, exerts tremendous calming effect for individuals. It allows them to be able to engage in some activities where they feel they have power, and that begins to extend then throughout other areas of their life. And so the returning to work is more than just reestablishing productivity or things of that nature, but it's that as well, because they rely on that income. But it's also true that returning to normal work has a tremendous psychological and emotional benefit. And as we talked earlier, the work family, returning to work and finding my coworkers together allows us to pull together in a way that creates energy, encouragement, strength. Again, reinforces that we're not in this alone and that we can get through this together. So how can we help? How can employers, what are some specific things that they can do to begin to move forward? And I know there are a variety of ways. I know that many employers are already engaged in coordination with the Red Cross, United Way, other helping organizations. And so I didn't want to necessarily focus on those areas, but I wanted to perhaps suggest a couple that may not have been thought of before, but that other employers are reporting have been effective, have been helpful. And so I think employers have the ability to structure and facilitate ways and opportunities for employees to get involved in specific opportunities. I mean, it is one thing to be able to say, well, I'm going to write a check to the Red Cross or to United Way or to some other aid organization, and I guess I hope that helps. But employers, it may already have opportunities where they're already engaged with community groups. Perhaps as an employer, you've been facilitating mentoring to a local school, or perhaps you're aware of a shelter that has opened up down the street, or that there are other things in your community proximate to your location. And so being able to leverage those opportunities for specific actions that can be helpful. You may even want to recruit a team of volunteers among your employees to be able to help local aid groups. Again, one of the things that helps keep people buoyant, that encourages their spirit, that helps them feel like they're doing something important and effective, is giving them opportunities to help. And so having a team identified that can go and assist with some of the local efforts, even though they may still be recovering themselves, acting in altruistic and helpful ways is an encouragement to the spirit and lifts them up emotionally. There may be other ways for organizations, companies that are either national or perhaps even international. So often other colleagues in other parts of the company, perhaps scattered around the globe, are saying, what can we do to help? Are there some things that we can do to help our colleagues in Texas and Louisiana? And so oftentimes maybe facilitating ways where a donation of needed supplies can be encouraged throughout the company, both personal supplies, things of toiletries, clothing, things of that nature, but also job-related supplies. What I really need right now is, frankly, a yellow legal pad or some pens or a desk and folding chair in order to establish a temporary workstation, or all the kinds of things that, because you may do the similar activities or because you're familiar with their job duties, you're able to perhaps donate or accumulate supplies that allows them to re-engage in meaningful work activities. You know what those are, and that may be a way to help support those employees. Other companies are establishing a bank of donated paid time off hours, recognizing that few people have accumulated enough vacation or sick time to be able to take the time off needed to rebuild, to recoup, or to attend to those who may be injured or sick within their family. And so having a bank of donated hours may allow those employees to engage in those activities in a way they wouldn't otherwise. Some companies are collecting and distributing funds in easily accessible ways. For example, prepaid Visa cards with a set amount on it so that people don't have to go through a laborious process of filling out paperwork or jumping through what they perceive to be hoops. This is a way to distribute funds in a limited way, but it allows them to immediately, again, purchase food, clothing, diapers, other things that may have been lost in the um, in the flood, and this is a way to allow them to do that in a way that is easily accessible and quickly distributed. And then finally, some companies are establishing a home rebuilding fund because reports are indicating that as many as 3 out of 4 Houston residents did not have flood insurance on their homes or in their apartments, partly because up to this point, many of those locations were not even deemed to be in the flood zone. And so often they didn't have that insurance because they didn't feel it was necessary or that they were at risk. And so there's only so much that insurance is going to be able to do, and establishing a specific fund that can help with rebuilding is often very welcomed, very appreciated by those who are struggling with how do I rebuild. Now I want to speak specifically to those of you who are business leaders, who are managers, team leads, who are executives. We recognize that leaders at times like this are often the face of the response. This is when all eyes are on you. The employees are looking to their leadership at a time like this. They are in a state of concern, of fear, of chaos, and they look to leaders at these times. And we recognize that that takes an emotional toll on you as a leader as well, because not only do you have that burden on your shoulders, but for many of you, you're not immune to this. For many leaders, they report, I experienced my own disruption as a result of this. And so it's difficult for me to always be able to set aside my own personal concerns as I'm caring for my team. So some leaders make the mistake of isolating, of pulling back, of saying, listen, I need to retreat to my office, close the door because there is so much that needs to be done. But let me just say that isolation is costly. So many leaders have shared in the past that was a mistake as they pulled away and they were no longer visible and they were no longer perceived as accessible, then people began to doubt their leadership abilities. And it's important to be out there and to be present with your employees, with your team, so that they can see the visible example of leadership. As I said earlier, employee assistance programs often provide tremendous resources and support at a time like this, both to help you strategize and to help outline what a valuable self-care plan would look like. But sometimes leaders are reluctant to use those services. They say, oh, the EAP, that's for my team, that's for my direct reports, but that's not necessarily something I'm going to utilize. I would encourage you, please practice what you preach. If it's good enough for your employees, it's good enough for you. Reach out to to your employee assistance programs with the recognition that they are an invaluable resource at a time like this for leaders as well as for line employees. So some specific tips. Communicate, communicate, communicate. You cannot over-communicate in a time like this. Giving short, brief updates frequently, letting people know, here's what we know so far, here's what we don't know, but once we find out, we're going to let you know. Having frequent communication establishes you as a leader as a verifiable source of solid information. In the absence of that, if I say, well, I'll communicate once I know all the facts, I'll communicate once I know the big picture, I'm going to wait so that I can just do it once and then be done with it. If you wait, you're going to be chasing the rumor mill, because in the absence of real information, human tendency is to plug in our worst possible fears. If you're not out early communicating, people are going to interpret that as leadership doesn't have a plan. I guess I'm going to have to look elsewhere for information. And We all know that the internet, as valuable as it is, um, may often be a source of misinformation, and it's not always the best source for my employees to get solid and reliable information. It's also true in my communications that I want to be sensitive and straightforward. I want to acknowledge the power of this event. I want to acknowledge the disruption and the impact it has had on us as a team, on each of you as individual employees. I want to be able to speak in a way that lets people know that I get both the emotional impact of this, that I'm compassionate but also competent, that we are going to move through this. I believe in our strengths. I believe in our ability to handle this. And so we are going to move forward. Check in often with your team. Be visible. Walk the floor. Check in through email and other communication venues, encouraging your teams to do the same. This is a time when again, that work family checking in with each other and saying, hey, how are you doing? I know it's been a week. Hey, how's the rebuild coming? Just checking in allows people to know, again, that they're not alone and leverages the strength of the connectedness that the workplace offers. As a business leader, you want to maintain the balance between individual needs and organizational objectives. I want to support those individuals. I recognize that people are going to have different needs at different times. They may need some flexibility in their schedule as they're seeking to rebuild. And then I want to balance that with the fact that normal business operations, as we said earlier, lends structure, predictability, familiarity to those employees. And so I don't want to necessarily say, well, we're not going to focus on any business or doing anything normal or productive until we're through this, because it's going to be a while. So being able to focus on both the business needs and the individual needs in a balanced way positions you as a leader in the best possible way. As I've said before, seeking guidance from your EAP allows you to strategize given the unique situation that your workplace may present as you go forward. Finally, some tips that others have found helpful, that they have found useful in managing their own stress and calming themselves and being able to take care of themselves. Some tips and strategies that are basic for all of us as leaders or as line employees as well, and that we could perhaps even share with family members. Remember to get, as best you can, maintain regular sleep, diet, and physical exercise, getting some walks, things like that. Those might seem like, almost simplistic or too normal and regular of an activity. How could I possibly eat anything right now? How could I possibly sleep? But the fact is that this is exhausting. Getting through this is physically exhausting, and I need to maintain regular sleep. I need to have healthy food. I need to allow my body to de-stress with physical exercise to the degree I'm able, as a way of keeping your body at its peak condition in order to make the next right move. Also, reach out intentionally. Surround yourself with caring people. Reach out to those you know feed into your life and support you in positive ways. Set boundaries. Now is not necessarily the time to engage in new activities or to take on additional projects, or to to engage in maybe personal challenges. Recognize what my limits are. Set those boundaries and be cautious. Be cautious again, not to make impulsive decisions that I may regret later on. As I said earlier, setting and achieving small manageable tasks, setting a list of things that I could check off and begin to build a sense of momentum is important. Give yourself time. Recognize again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Give yourself the time, give your team the time it needs to get through this. We're not going to get through it in a hurry. There's no quick way through this. We will get through this, but we have to give ourselves time and extend a little bit of grace, a little bit of understanding to ourselves and to each other. And then, as I've said along, It just makes perfect sense. It's wisdom itself to seek assistance from your employee assistance program, from faith mentors, from community groups, your friends, others as well. And some may even want to seek out professional counseling if stress levels continue at the same level and don't seem to be resolving or abating with any speed. But seeking assistance at this time is the smart thing to do, and again reinforces that you're not alone in the midst of this. As we go through this, our goal, as I said before, not to return to normal, as this didn't happen. That's not realistic. But recognizing that a new normal will emerge. You will re-engage. We will find new patterns. We will find new ways to adapt and cope, because human resilience is incredible. Throughout history, we have seen how people have risen to the challenge, even in the face of the most unthinkable events, and yet they've been able to reach out to others around them and reach in within to find the strength to rise to this and to establish a new normal. Texans are strong. Houston is strong. Louisiana is strong. And a new normal will emerge. And I hope that these thoughts, these tips may be useful for what you do, but I don't want to leave you with the idea that, okay, my job as a business leader is to say exactly the right thing in exactly the right way at exactly the right time. I don't want to add to your burden or lead you to think that there's a magic and only one way of handling this. Instead, I refer to you this quote from Maya Angelou, in which she said, I've learned that people will forget what you said. They're going to forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. As a business leader, you are in that unique place to help your team feel cared for, to help your team feel competent, encouraged, to help them pull together as a unit, and to capitalize on the strength that already exists. And so it's not that you have to do a magic and miraculous things, but instead just helping them feel cared for, and that knowing that you are there as a company supporting them can make all the difference. And so I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen to this webinar. If you have questions, please, I want to encourage you. Other questions, go to r3continuum.com. We have additional resources there. And you can also post questions to response at r3continuum.com. And we will seek to answer those as well. But again, our thoughts, our encouragement, the prayers and hopes of the nation are with all of those in that region. And we know that Texans are strong, and they will get through this. But we are all there pulling for you as well. Thank you again.